Intel has had a really bad week, and that bad week sort of sheds light on the longer term challenges the chip giant has. So let's run the tape and roll through the week, and we'll go through the craptacular week that was Intel. So before we get going, let's just talk a little bit about attribution and basically our inspiration for this little rant. First, it's the Alexander and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. The whole theme for Intel is kind of this way, except it played out over a week. So it all started last Friday, where Intel posted an editorial saying that the FTC ruling against Qualcomm should stand and that Qualcomm's appeal is bogus. It also said Qualcomm was anti-competitive, and that's why, it lost a ton of money on 5G modems. By itself, this wasn't terribly interesting until you get to the following Monday, where Intel completes the sale of its smartphone modem business to Apple. So Intel sold this for $1 billion to Apple. Apple gets to control more of its destiny, and Intel gets to punt on a market where it spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to compete with Qualcomm. So on the bright side, Intel is focused on the Internet of Things and 5G networking. So it has 5G plays other places. It is just not doing smartphones and modems, which the question there is, can Intel do 5G in other areas if it doesn't control the small screen? And that's ongoing debate. And just as a quick recap, Intel was very upbeat on the modem market not that long ago. This is an annual report from 2018. They talked about 5G a good bit. They did note there are a number of large companies in development of 5G cellular modems, and they compete with all of them. But in the gist, they bit off more than they could chew. So those items with 5G smartphone modems, not the end of the world, not even all that surprising. Because after all, Intel owns IoT and the data center space, right? Big cloud player. Basically, a lot of instances run on Intel, right? And then there was the Amazon Web Services big conference this week. And they rolled out this thing called the Graviton 2, which is an ARM-based processor that will essentially offer better price and performance than Intel's instances on AWS. Now, as far as benchmarks go, this is all apples to apples comparison. It's basically running AWS workloads. But what's really interesting here is that Graviton 2 is ARM-based, and Intel has a hypervisor layer that basically enables them to run on any processor. So here's the short version, but there's a lot of stuff going on with this chip. What really caught my eye and why it plays into Intel's bad week is that they walk through these specs. The yellow spec here is the Intel-based instance, and the green is Graviton 2. So basically, AWS's own silicon's outperforming Intel instances, at least the latest ones that are out so far. Intel will come out with new ones, and then, so will AWS. Now, AWS is not anti-Intel or anti-AMD, but the fact they're building their own chips is very interesting, especially if they land more workloads, because ultimately that may mean less workloads and fewer sales for Intel Xeon chips. So then we move on, and on the same day, Qualcomm came out with their Snapdragon 865 5G, which has AI engines and all this. And what's interesting here is this is a space that Intel vacated. And it doesn't sound like it's a huge deal until you get into the AI engine that they talked about on the platform, and it's going to enable a lot of things for photography and smartphones and all that. Now, like I said, Intel punted on this, so the Snapdragon thing isn't all that important until you go look at charts like this, where you can easily see how Qualcomm in the mobile area here will wind up over here in IoT and compute, where Intel competes. And that's a big deal. The other thing that caught my eye towards the end of the week on Thursday was Qualcomm came out with basically chipsets targeted at every market on the PC continuum, right? So they're targeting laptops, entry level, mid level, and premium devices now. And you know, these chips are supposed to give you better connectivity, better battery life, and also hook you up with lighter models. So, you know, Intel has answers for these things, but it's all going to be on the pricing. And as we use more browsers for smartphones or software usage and things like that, it may not matter as much whether you're x86 or ARM. So as that develops over time, Qualcomm's probably going to develop its own ecosystem for ARM, and the software vendors will come along, and Intel will have more competition there too. So it was a bad week, but in the long term, I think these things where, you know, Qualcomm's looking to work the 5G revolution into new markets, I think it's kind of jarring. And I think we can take Intel's one bad week in December and extrapolate it out for the long term. Now, Intel will be fine in that it has plenty of cash, plenty of manufacturing prowess. They have a lot of interesting things going on, but it's going to heat up. It's no longer just Intel versus AMD. It's Intel versus AMD versus ARM versus Qualcomm versus NVIDIA. And that's a lot of competition.